I am excited about this one. I got together with an old friend of mine, Josh Williams. We used to work at Facebook together, and we're going to talk about Facebook engineering culture and one of its coolest aspects, which was their love of posters, some of which you've seen before, some of which you probably haven't, and what their meaning is and the background story. I think this is a really great discussion. I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed having the chat with Josh. Before we get into it, I'm going to give a little plug to Zooplo. So Zooplo is the product I work on. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the programmable API gateway that runs at the edge. We're looking to change how people think about the API gateway and API management market. So if you have an API and are sharing it externally or internally, we can probably help with a highly programmable gateway that can deploy unlimited environments, and each one can be deployed in under 20 seconds. Just go check out zooplo.com, sign up for free, have fun. But in the meantime, here's the interview with Josh. Welcome to Studio Z, the new name for where I'm recording these videos. Today, we're joined by my good friend, Josh Williams, and we're going to talk about the posters of Facebook. What does that even mean? Well, Josh is going to explain more about that in a minute, but I will say that, I worked at Facebook for a while alongside Josh. We were on the same team for a few years. And the engineering culture at Facebook was frankly mind-blowing. I haven't seen anything like it before or since in terms of how they execute and the culture they build. And one of the keys of that is Facebook posters. We're gonna talk about that in a little minute. But before we do, I'm going to hand over to Josh to introduce himself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Josh Williams. Josh and I worked together for a few years. I was at Facebook for, eight and a half years or so after a long stint at Microsoft. I was an engineer there, mostly in a kind of tech lead capacity. I helped lead a number of teams, ranging from some of our ad products to building the first, what we now call Spark AR, face mask products. If you go into Instagram stories, you can use that today. And I helped lead the gaming and video teams and eventually the metaverse efforts before I left. And it was a great place to work. I absolutely loved it. I really loved the engineering culture and how much it was very focused on, all of the cultural values that the posters ended up imbuing. It was great.
So we're going to go through our top 10, but before we do that, and actually I picked 5, Josh picked the best 5 in his mind, I picked 5 to add to that. We'll go through them in reverse order in a minute. But talk a little bit more about, what Facebook posters? Like, what is this?
Yeah. So, the thing I used to tell people, I used to teach this class that we called Jedi Academy, and it was for incoming industry hires to Facebook. And we had a series of classes where we would go through how to have impact at Facebook, how to influence through others, how to work in the code base and what the norms were about coding and whatever. And I taught a couple of those classes, and one of them, I talked about the notion that, like, in your first week at Facebook, one of your jobs was to go look around and find all these cool posters that were all over the wall that imbued the Facebook cultural values and pick your favorites and then try to live them. And one of the things you would notice when you would walk around any Facebook campus, be it in California or in Seattle or in London or in Singapore, was the walls were just completely postered with all kinds of stuff that kind of looked like propaganda. I used to joke that this was propaganda-driven development. But one of the things that Facebook did very early, before I got there anyway, was they created this thing called the Analog Research Lab, which for a long time down in California at the what we call the Classic campus, it was hosted as a place where you could just go make things. And it had like a woodworking space, and it had a bunch of spaces to do artistic projects. But one of the big things that came out of it was posters. Mm-hmm. And they even made books. There's this famous Little Red book that floats around that they used to give out at boot camp, which I think is one of the better pieces of corporate propaganda that exists. You read that book and you kind of want to go to war. You look back on it now and you're like, I read it again just last year, and I was like, oh man, this makes me want to like go build something
great.
Big. There are parts of it that maybe haven't aged as well as those things do, but
I'm gonna take it out now.
But in any case, it's really interesting because people talk about the notion that culture is not what you write down; it's what you do every day.
Right.
You live your culture in these various ways, and that's actually what people will mimic. That's what people will end up putting into your products. That's what people will end up teaching to the new people that come. And Facebook managed to like have a little bit of its cake and eat it too, I think, through the posters, because the posters were not actually writing down treatises on here's our cultural, notion and here's all the ways to go implement it and whatever. It would just have a poster that would say move fast. And you'd be like, well, what does move fast mean? Well, that's pretty obvious. It just means like, let's go, right? Yeah. And we'll talk about a bunch of these things, but you look at these posters and they really are the representation of those values, and they're easy to interpret and easy to bring to your everyday life as an engineer or a PM or a designer or whomever. They ended up being debated at times.
Yeah.
Some of them were more controversial than others. But anyway, I think it's a really fun part of the ethos of what Facebook was, is and how that office space led to continuing its culture on.
Yeah, suffice to say then, is it that you think the posters are kind of a symptom of the culture and not why the culture's great, right?
Like
okay.
Yeah. No, but I think it was a reinforcing symptom. And one of the things I'll note is, when we went into COVID, we lost parts of our culture over time.
Yeah.
I think, and parts of why we lost that culture, I think, were not being in that space.
Yeah.
And so that space it was a symptom of the culture, but it became reinforcing, especially in a team that was in a company that was growing so fast. It was like an easy way to just like be in the water of the company culture just every day.
100%.
The other version of that is as a culture, we're very data centric. Mm-hmm. And we used to have dashboards everywhere.
Yep.
Just everywhere there were dashboards. And all the dashboards would, have various charts that were important to that particular team. And, you could put up whatever dashboard you wanted. And, generally engineers did. You didn't delegate to data scientists and, whatever. You would just put stuff up on the wall and then keep an eye on it. And if something went wrong, well, their chart would go wrong and you would look into it and file a 7, whatever. Yeah. And as we went into COVID, that was another thing culturally, where the space was imbuing the culture of paying attention to that data. And all of a sudden, it's easy to have a tab open that is your dashboard and then have it get covered by another tab.
Yep.
Whereas if you have a monitor up on the wall, nothing's ever going to cover that. And you're going to walk to the bathroom and you're going to look at it. And I think the posters kind of serve that same purpose. So anyway, it's interesting. I know they're now heading back to the office, and maybe they will, that will start
reinvigorated.
We'll see.
We'll see. So let's start with the first one, which is one of the 5 I have picked. And it's really a kind of obvious one. I think we've got to talk about it. We can't not talk about it. You've already said it once, and that's the classic move fast and break things. So, this seems so old now and so famous. I wonder if people already have an impression of what this means. I think some of the posters in here are going to be a surprise to people. People won't know them. What's your take? What did this poster mean? Why was it so fresh and so interesting? Why is it so famous?
Well, the thing that blows my mind about this poster is the company tried to eradicate the notion of this being a formative part of the culture. This simple, small statement being a formative part of the culture. Back in 2009 or 10 or something like that. It was one of the early F8s where they were well, we're changing it to move fast with stable infrastructure, right? But it's interesting because I think what has happened over the years is people have misinterpreted this one pretty strongly as be careless.
Yeah.
Is the one of the misinterpretations by people who were not part of the culture.
Yeah.
What this really was meant to convey was that there's a lot of expectations that you bring to the table about how to version software from a user's perspective, how to move something forward. And the company, especially early on, but I think even still, is very comfortable with the idea that sometimes making something better requires breaking expectations.
Yep.
And requires it may work for a bunch of people in a certain way, but you're never going to get to this new thing unless you're willing to break that way that it works. And so I think that was my takeaway of what this was trying to convey was be comfortable with the idea that you are not bound by the expectations of the product as it stands today.
Yeah.
And that it is okay and in fact expected.
Yeah.
That you should be willing to break things. Now, there were, when we talked about it in later years, there were clearly things that were exemptions to that rule. We talked about privacy, data security. There were a bunch of things that we treated as unbreakable.
Yep.
And which is not to say that there was never a mistake, but this was never about mistakes. This was actually not about be comfortable with the idea of shipping crap. This was about be comfortable with the idea of shipping things that breaks expectations and does something different. So
the thing this makes me think of actually, and it's a story I tell quite a bit as well, is when I worked on the ads team, we would often get complaints that we would change the UI. So the number one complaint we got from partners, people like using the advertising product, Ads Manager or whatever it's called, was that it changed and we were willing to break it. And at the same time, though, you'd talk to those same customers and say, yeah, but is the new version much better? How does it compare to the competition?
Yep.
And they'd be like, yeah, it's better, but it's annoying that you keep changing it. And so we think about this a lot at Zooplo is, there's some things we can't break our runtime production APIs, we just can't do that. But we will be more brave changing the UI.
Yeah.
And it might be a little bit painful for people, but that's how we're going to keep ahead and stay on top and produce the best experience. That's another way I think about this particular
100%.
This particular poster. Okay, let's do the next one. I actually can't remember the orders now. This is going to be a surprise. I love this one actually.
That's great.
What would you do if you weren't afraid? Do you want to get started with your thoughts on this?
I mean, so I have a personal story about this, which is I am now taking a sabbatical for a little while, and part of it was I sat down at the end of last year and asked myself, what would I do if I was not afraid?
That's funny. Yeah.
And I said, I would take some time for myself. I've been working for 25 years, working very hard, and I would figure out what the next thing is in a vacuum instead of like continuity. But I think this was just a challenge to everybody to ask, like, what makes you uncomfortable?
Yeah.
I was debating between various jobs, internally moving around various teams at one point. And I remember talking to a friend who I trusted, like a colleague who I debated things with, about the various options. And one day I came in, on my desk was sitting a bumper sticker, and it said, "Beware of comfort." And he had left that on my desk, and I kind of instantly knew that he had left that on my desk. And I loved it so much that I went out and found where it was from, and I bought a bunch and have had them on my laptops pretty much ever since, although I can no longer find it, unfortunately. But, the argument there was like, hey, being afraid of things is keeping you from doing things that will stretch you. Yeah. Being afraid of things is keeping you from your best self.
Yeah.
And I think that this was about challenging all of us to not be afraid of doing things that people might not expect. Not be afraid of doing things that are bold, not be afraid of doing things that might not be positive in the beginning from a metrics perspective, but you trust yourself, you keep a back test, and you see if it plans out.
This is the long-term bet. Very similar. I think this was in my mind when we started Zooplo. I'm like, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And when I was starting to have that contemplation. I think this is such a big part of Facebook culture. This idea, I remember Rabkin, his name was Mark Rabkin, right? Apparently he had a picture frame on his desk that said, "This is growth. Growth is painful. This is growth." It was just such the idea of get out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
Take some risks. Take some personal risks. Was such a big part of the culture. I think, really, really important. Okay, let's have a look what we've got up next. Okay, this one has a nice little story to it. So I don't know if this will show up clearly, but we'll put up some graphics. But this is Be the Nerd. So if you don't know the story of this, it's probably a bit nonsensical to people who just saw the poster, but you know the story, right?
Yeah, the story is that Mark Zuckerberg had made some post. And I don't remember the exact post, but I want to say it was a post about how he maybe had just added a machine translation to videos, and he had made a post about how this was really, really helpful for people who were hearing impaired. And how it really expanded the opportunity to understand what was going on in friends' videos on Facebook and other videos on Facebook. And some woman, or I guess from the context was a mother, came on and said, "Mark, I just love what you're doing, blah, blah, blah." And there was some context of being a nerd or whatever. He was geeking out. And I think he had said that he was geeking out on this. And she said, "I hope my daughter marries a nerd someday." And Mark responded and said, "I hope your daughter, will be the nerd someday." And one of the things, that's the story.
That's the story. Yeah.
That's the story. But I think Mark has always is a pretty hyper inclusive individual.
Yeah.
And the culture was run that way too. Interestingly, from the perspective of the ways that people would normally think about inclusivity, of trying to get more women in the culture, more underrepresented folks, but also from the perspective of how we ran teams from a discipline perspective.
Yeah.
I came from Microsoft before I came to Facebook, and one of the things that blew my mind from an engineering culture, and I guess we're getting slightly away from the poster, but it blew my mind from the engineering culture was I never really spent a lot of time working deeply with designers before, like I got red lines, and then we would like implement things to the red lines, but it was like this like contractual, transactional like relationship.
Yep.
And we didn't have a data scientist and a user researcher that were embedded on our team and sitting next to us every day, and that we were debating how products should work with. And at Facebook, the thing that you find is almost every product team has, committed researchers, sometimes, multiple full-time researchers. They'll have designers, they'll have data scientists, and it's not just some PMs and engineers kind of deciding what to do in a vacuum.
Content strategy wasn't even a role
Content
I heard
strategy,
of when I joined.
At times it can be a little frustrating because you can have so many voices in the room as you're trying to do decide what you're trying to do. But overall, it was mind-blowing to me how much it broadened what we built and how we built it, and the net was like super.
I think you nailed it as well. I think this was like the ultimate signaling of inclusivity, right? Like it really sent out a signal that this was what mattered, and they were very good at that. Total props to those guys. Okay, cool. So this from my perspective is my favorite design. Not my favorite poster from a cultural point of view, but they would just have different posters for different reasons. So this is the 2G Tuesday poster. Do you want to take the honors and describe it?
I'll describe it, and then I'll let you talk about it because I think it is your favorite. Although you're going to have to put a blow up on there because it's such a good
we will
poster.
put graphics up for all of these.
So 2G Tuesday was a recognition. One of the things that's interesting about being at a company like Facebook is you're building products for billions of people, not millions of people. Capital B, billions of people. And one of the realities of building products for billions of people is that like many people on the internet do not have the same experience that we have sitting here in Seattle, Washington, where we have relatively high-speed bandwidth everywhere we go, where we have like modern phones, and, giant screens and all these other things. And one of the things that's hard in a dog fooding culture, which you talked earlier about, one of the great things about the engineering culture at Facebook was it was a heavily dog fooding culture. And so, a lot of times the expectation was that people were using the products. They were using the products every day. A lot of times they were using the products for work. But we would rarely use the products in a way that was representative of the actual users out there in the world, or many of the actual users out in the world. So 2G Tuesday was a thing where Messenger, the messaging app that's connected to Facebook, or the Facebook graph, basically would speed limit itself on network to the equivalent of a 2G network connection every Tuesday. Funny aside, way back in the day when I was at Microsoft, I worked on what's called the Common Language Runtime, which underlies .NET. And there was a period of time when it still had to support Windows 95 and Windows NT. And so one of those was ASCII and one was Unicode. And so for the purposes of our test suites, a couple days a week, all of our test suites would run in ASCII, and then the rest of the time they would run in Unicode, and it would help us catch bugs.
ASCII Wednesdays or something.
Yeah, I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, but it helped us catch bugs in places where we hadn't properly fully Unicodified the runtime. But this was meant for the same purpose, which was to basically say, hey, your Messenger experience is going to suck every Tuesday, including your work Messenger experience. When this was happening, we still used we used Messenger for work before we had Work Chat. And the implication was, if you want your work messenger to be better, you should make messenger work better under those conditions. And you should make sure that you can still send a photo and still send a video and still get the notification about when people are present under these like bad network conditions. And that if we did that, then the hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world who that was their everyday network condition would have a much better experience.
Yeah. So I think you've described the poster beautifully. I mean, I think to wrap it up, for me, this is one, again, around empathy, and the excellent job I think was done at Facebook on like forcing people to sort of see things through their users' eyes. There was lots of other posters and motions we could talk about. What was the one that was called like Go Global, Think Local or something? That was, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but if you want to build a great global product, you've got to understand it from the local perspective. Like, in Thailand, people have a different experience of Facebook, etc., to somewhere else and use it differently, and their needs are different. So yeah, I think but I just love the design, the idea that there's this fast-moving cheater that's suddenly in sort of low res because it's slowly loading up and interpolated JPEG or whatever those things were called that we used to have. Okay, so on to the next poster. This was a bit of a Seattle favorite. I don't know if they were in Menlo. I don't know.
I don't know. This was kind of one of these. This one was a bit of a what do you call it?
Like a one-off, like a special edition.
Yeah, not vigilante is not the right word, but like from the streets.
This did not come from Analog Research Lab. This came from from Heather or something.
It came from Mike Murphy. So the marketplace team.
Should we introduce the poster?
Oh yeah, we should introduce the poster.
So the poster has a picture of a shark wearing boxing gloves, and it says "Be scrappy." And then you probably can't see this here, but we'll put the thing on the graphics. It says VJ Raji. And quickly context: VJ was VP at Facebook. Both Josh and I worked for. And Josh, you worked with VJ for like a long time, back at Microsoft as well, I think. So you folks go way back. I will say VJ, I talk about him a lot with the Zooplo team. He's like a big inspiration to me in terms of how he runs teams. And so that's why I picked this poster, so we could talk about it. But I'm going to hand over to you now and give the background, why it happened, and what does it mean, and what is VJ's particular culture.
And VJ's actually, he has his own startup right now, and it's living out his dream of starting a company and growing it. So at the end of the day, VJ was probably one of the scrappiest individuals that I knew. He was always passionate about the idea of just doing the minimum that you had to do in order to get something out the door. Now, it's interesting because actually one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of doing the minimum. Yeah. Because doing the minimum sounds really bad. Yeah. or doing just enough sounds really bad. It sounds like giving up. One of the things that VJ brought to the table was an enormously well-refined product sense. And when he would talk about being scrappy and doing the minimum, it wasn't like the bare minimum, whatever. It was like, do the minimum that is a good product. Do the minimum that will prove your hypothesis. One of the things that Facebook's very well known for is its experimental and data-driven culture. And one of the big questions with a hypothesis in general, if you're, following the scientific method, is what do you need to do in order to ensure that you will get a clean read out the other end to either the null hypothesis is true or it isn't, right? And so being scrappy was about understanding where on the dial that you had to be in order to move something forward, learn, and iterate, while resisting the temptation to do a lot more than was necessary. Because that temptation is always there. I think, any product builder wants to believe at the end that their product's going to be great, and they see the product in that light of that finished, completed light, and they want it to get closer and closer every day. But the reality is, you'll be surprised along the way how often you find out that your intuitions were wrong, that the users use it in a way that is different than you thought, all kinds of things. And the only way you learn that is actually by experimenting. Yep. And the only way you can experiment quickly in a way that, you don't end up dying on the vine is by being scrappy. Yeah. So anyway, at some point, some folks on the marketplace team, which VJ helped boot up the marketplace, Facebook marketplace product, this guy, Mike Murphy, created this poster and posted it all over the Seattle office. And I don't know if it made it outside. I assume it made it to California because there was a big chunk of the marketplace team in California. And, but, it's always fun to see that one around.
Yeah. One of the other things I learned from VJ, I mean, there's so many, but that I think fits well with this is the idea of like taking the smaller compounding wins. The math is like, 1% win every day over a year is 32x growth, and so he was a big fan of like, don't always just swing for the fences with some massive thing, but actually if you can go and remove friction and find like smaller grain improvements, it's going to lead to like a big outcome in the end.
Yeah, it always intrigued me how often people would like run a test and it wouldn't come back as like big as they wanted, and so they'd want to throw it away and move on and try again. VJ was like, well, take the 1%. Yeah, like totally. No, ship it. Like then experiment again, right? But
yeah, totally. Okay, so this is onto Josh's top 5 selection of posters now. Sorry, we're going to stop it there. This one's so good that we're going to break it into 2 parts. So subscribe, get notifications. We'll drop the next part in just over a week. And And yeah, I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Like, what posters did we miss? What was your favorite poster? What should be in the remaining 5 that Josh is going to cover in the next video? What did you think of the ones that we picked? What do you think of the meaning we put to it? Let us know in the comments. And yeah, stick around. Again, gonna give a quick plug to Zooplo. So if you are a startup launching an API and you want to have an amazing developer experience for consumers of your API, you want a Stripe quality API experience, Zooplo is that in a box with the developer portal, developer documentation, API key authentication, JOT authentication, rate limiting, all of it out of the box and very easy to use. So be sure to sign up for free at zooplo.com, give it a try, and also let us know what you think of that. And we'll see you soon with part 2.